like snow in a silver vase. Chapter 8. The Spiritual Journey of ALEJANDRO JODOROWSKY. Okay, and by the way, why do you talk so much, you son of a bitch? I told you to shut up. I might get so tired I'll put a bullet through your balls. Silver Cane, Madison Cult. Anna Perla, as the head of the group of disciples, received the master at the airport. He was accompanied by a sweet nun named Machiko, who would later become his wife, and her 10-year-old adopted daughter, Tomiko, an orphan. Exhausted and irritable from lack of sleep on the long trip, Ijo cut short any talk with a brief bow and asked to be taken directly to the Zendo to rest. Anna complied with this, but decided that while the family was sleeping, all the disciples must meditate until the master awakened. This lasted for about 2 hours, but then we all began to fall asleep. In the early hours of the morning, everyone was awakened by a piercing shout of "Kwatsu!" The master was standing before us, indignantly pointing his finger at the cat. The disciples had decided to shave the top of its head to imitate a monk. They had also dressed it in a brown robe and had trimmed its ears and tail. Ijo Takata stood frozen in the center of the Zendo, which was now decorated in a kind of hippie Aztec style. It was clear that he was barely able to control his rage. The disappointment of witnessing this grotesque perversion of his teaching was soon to be amplified by the humiliation that would be inflicted upon him by Fernando Molina. I had been meditating with Ijo for about 2 years. Very late one night, someone rang my doorbell, which made me nervous. My cottage, though in a central part of the city, had no near neighbors. In front was a vacant lot where pitched battles between cats and huge rats took place. The buildings next to mine formed a solid, connected row of tottering, ruined houses that were barely held up by rotten beams. They were home to so many scorpions and spiders that even the most desperate alcoholics dared not sleep there. Mastering my fear, I unlocked the chain and opened the door. Before me was a slender youth with tiny eyes that glittered like coals and teeth so large he looked like a horse. He held a bouquet of sunflowers. It was Fernando Molina, a stand-up comedian who worked in variety theaters, appearing between striptease acts with a stream of salacious jokes and stories. I invited him to enter. After giving me the bouquet, he raised a fist in front of my face and with an extreme disrespect, indicating madness, said, "If you tell me, I'll punch you in the mouth. And if you don't tell me, I'll punch you in the mouth. What?" A multitude of thoughts raced through my mind at the speed of light. The This guy was clearly a raving barbarian who learned vaguely something about koans and wanted to test me in a stupid and vulgar way. If I was to give him the correct response to this koan, which I happened to have learned from Ijo, he wouldn't understand and he would try to punch me anyway. So I decided to apply the deeper lessons I had learned from the master. Conquering my fear, I relaxed my muscles and emptied my mind of all thoughts, looking deeply and steadily into his eyes, asking nothing, offering nothing, simply being there like a stone or a bird. With churlish contempt, Molina drew back his arm to hurl the punch. Without blinking an eye, I stood with perfect Christian mildness, ready to receive the blow, and then the unthinkable happened. It was one of those incredibly precise synchronicities that arrive exactly when they are needed. The entire row of dilapidating neighboring houses collapsed. It resounded like an explosion, and a cloud of dust billowed in through the window, covering us. I took advantage of the shock, pushing Fernando away from me, and shouted, "There is your answer to your what?" The comedian was so agitated that his horse-like teeth were chattering. He then burst out laughing, hesitated for a few seconds, and finally kneeled before me. Tomorrow, I was supposed to take a plane to Peru to see a master who lives there, but tonight I dreamed of you. You were seated in meditation like an ancient sage. I prostrated before you, gave you a bouquet of sunflowers, and begged you, save me. Give me the teaching that I lack. Enlighten me. And you answered, wake up and come see me immediately. So I did. On the way at Rio de Janeiro Plaza, I noticed a large bed of sunflowers planted around a copy of Michelangelo's David. I stole 11 of them and brought them to you. Do you understand? 11 sunflowers plus myself makes 12 disciples turning around the central sun. That sun is you, who are able to make a whole street collapse. Hold on there, Fernando. Those houses have been in ruins and ready to collapse for a long time. It's an accident that it happened now. Your dream was correct in telling you to come see me, but not because I'm your master. Instead, it told you to come so that I can introduce you to a real master, which will make your trip to Peru unnecessary. His name is Ijo Takata. He's an authentic Zen monk who can give you the teachings you desire. Now, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. In 3 hours, Ijo will begin his meditation. Let's have some coffee, and then I'll take you to the Zendo. Sadly, the comedian pointed to his teeth. I broke all of them in a motorcycle accident. They gave me these huge false teeth which make me look like a horse. No master would take me seriously. Don't worry about it. Ijo sees your essential being. At the Zendo, Ijo took Fernando by the chin affectionately, looked at his teeth, sighed deeply, and said, "One day you will have very beautiful eyes." From that time on, Molina kept his mouth shut tightly, decided to remain mute for the rest of his life, and moved into the Zendo, sleeping on the meditation platform. He kept the place impeccably swept and mopped, whitewashed the walls, and cooked rice. Later, he helped Mashiko rid the plants of parasites, accompanied Tomiko to school, cleaned the cat box, was allowed to walk among the meditating disciples, brandishing the kiyosaku, the slapping of the shoulder blades of the drowsy ones with slumping backs, made trips to the market to scavenge leftover fruits and vegetables, and did many other things. Touched by such devotion, Ijo was full of hope, imagining a future in which the ancient cultures of Japan and Mexico would come together in a religious embrace. When Fernando's head was shaved and he donned the robes of a monk, Ijo wrote a poem. He who has no arms, and he who has no legs. He who has no arms will help with his arms, and he who has no legs will help with his legs in this great spiritual work where many beings will lose their hair. Shortly afterward, Ijo decided to send his first Mexican monk to the same monastery where he had been trained. At this news, Molina let out a great neigh of pleasure, showing his teeth for the first time in a year. All of us contributed money to help purchase the airplane ticket, most of which had been paid for by a contribution from the Japanese embassy. A month later, the master received a card from Muman Yamanda congratulating him on having trained such an exemplary monk who outdid even his Japanese disciples in his devotion to daily tasks and meditation. Later, Ijo returned again to Japan. When he arrived at the monastery, it was as if he was drenched with a huge bucket of cold water. The very day he went to visit his old master, the monks who had had the job of supervising the letters and packages that novices received from their families had made an unpleasant discovery. Concealed in the boxes of chocolates that Molina had been receiving from Mexico were several types of drugs, including opium paste, heroin, and LSD. Worse, they discovered that a part of the package contents had been set aside for the purpose of selling drugs to the other novices. Thus, the first Mexican monk was expelled in disgrace and forbidden to enter any Zen monastery or temple in Japan. Judging from the terrible rage that Ijo manifested in the Zendo upon his return, his shame and disappointment must have been immense. Molina had already returned from Japan, taking a plane that had left only 2 hours before his. Acting as if nothing had happened, Fernando was still wearing his monk's robes and sleeping soundly next to Ana Perla. Mingled with the fragrances of incense, sandalwood, patchouli, and myrrh was a strong odor of marijuana. Standing motionless for a moment before this spectacle, Ijo suddenly burst into a flurry of raging action. Swinging his stick, he smashed all the flower vases, the pre-Columbian sculptures, the Shivas and the Shaktis, and the gilded Buddhas. He ripped from the walls all the Kabbalistic and astrological posters and removed the cat's robe and tossed it out the window. He also tossed out all the zafus, which formerly black had been covered with white cloth and embroidered with huichol designs. Then he proceeded to expel Anna Perla and the others who were in the zendo, threatening them with his fists and feet. Terrified, they all fled in haste. Only Fernando Molina remained, sitting hunched in a ball, his head between his legs and his arms clasped tightly. Ijo rolled him out the door and into the middle of the street, but Molina refused to budge. He remained there in a ball with cars swerving to avoid him, and there he stayed for hours. Yet the master's compassion seemed to have vanished. Finally, an ambulance arrived. They placed him on a stretcher, still rolled in a ball, and took him away. We never saw him again. 3 years later, I learned that Molina had appeared in a happening, in quotes, now endowed with normal teeth. His new act consisted of burning a monk's robe and copulating with his wife upon its ashes before a large audience. Late that night, Anna Perla sneaked back into the zendo, accompanied by 6 of her acolytes, and painted this graffiti upon its facade in huge red letters: Buddha is a woman. During this dismal period, I decided imprudently to read to the master the following essay, which I had just published in the cultural supplement of the conservative periodical Heraldo de Mexico. Donald Duck and Zen Buddhism. There exists a Donald Duck comic that corresponds exactly to the message of Koans 42 and 44 of the Book of Mormon Khan. The city fire chief invites Donald to join the volunteer firefighters. He tells his 3 nephews about it. They want to join too, but their uncle considers them incompetent and orders them to stay at home. Donald is provided with a complete uniform on condition that he rush immediately to the scene of the fire as soon as he hears the alarm. If he arrives in time, he will receive a bronze medal. Proudly, Donald empties a chest, saying he'll need the space for all the medals he's bound to receive. That night, the alarm rings, but he sleeps through it. His nephews drag him out of his sleep. He hurries to the fire, but he forgets his helmet. He also forgets his hatchet and his pants. When he finally arrives with these items, it is too late. The house he was supposed to save is a mass of smoking ruins, and the other firefighters have left. The next day, the chief demotes him, taking away his hatchet and replacing it with a small extinguisher. That night, the alarm rings again, and once more, his nephews have to drag him out of sleep. This time, he dresses more carefully, but in his haste, he grabs a can of insecticide instead of the extinguisher. When he sprays it on the fire, it only makes the flames worse. The chief demotes him again. From now on, he has only a sack to use against the fire. Wanting to help him, his nephews decide to set a small fire so that he will not be too depressed and will have work to do. Meanwhile, Donald discovers a package of fireworks, including rockets. Thinking they are dangerous, he stuffs them in his coat pockets. Uncle Donald, there's a fire in the street. You must take your sack and save the town. Donald succeeds in putting out the flames, but his coat catches fire and he runs home. The rocket explodes there, and his living room catches on fire. The nephews put it out with a hose. The chief arrives and is impressed by the nephews. He invites them to join the firefighters. The next night, when the alarm sounds, the nephews wake up shouting, "We must go quickly. Nothing can stand in our way." They rush off toward the fire in a modern, fully equipped fire truck. Meanwhile, poor Donald is left standing in the street with his pathetic sack, watching the truck speed away. "They all have the luck," he mutters. Several esoteric teachings point out the error that causes us to link all our ordinary states of consciousness, forgetting that they are separated by vast lakes of sleep. Zen is based upon a total awakening known as Satori. Satori is the alpha and the omega of Zen Buddhism. It may be defined as intuitive insight into the nature of things, as opposed to logical or analytical understanding. In practice, it signifies the discovery of a new world heretofore unnoticed because of the confusion of a mind educated in dualism. When we experience Satori, everything around us is seen with a kind of perception that has never been known. In quotes, Essays on Zen Buddhism, D.T. Suzuki.